The new system had every feature enabled, every workflow configured, every automation rule active, and within a month the people who needed to use it had found a way around it. The implementation team had done everything right by their own measure. The tool was fully configured, the workflows mapped every scenario, the automation rules covered every exception. The service desk team sat through 3 days of training and went live on a Monday. By Friday, they had a spreadsheet running in parallel. By the end of the month, they had submitted a formal request to decommission the tool. This pattern repeats every time a process or tool is designed by the people who understand it best, rather than the people who will use it most. The designers optimize for completeness. The users optimize for speed. And when the two conflict, which they always do, the users win. They find the workaround, they maintain the parallel system, and the official process becomes something that exists in documentation and nowhere else. 3 organizations, 3 different expressions of the same failure. The process was designed, the tool was configured, the document was written, and the people who needed to use them found a way to avoid them. Complexity that isn't used isn't rigor. It's overhead that no one can justify and no one has the authority to remove. The real problem isn't that these teams built bad tools or wrote bad processes. The ITSM configuration at Service Mimir was technically sound. The incident form at Orbis Health captured genuinely useful data. The change procedure at CityGrid contained real controls. The problem was that none of them were designed around the practical reality of the people who would use them every day. That's where ITIL's 6th guiding principle comes in. Keep it simple and practical is the 6th ITIL guiding principle. It is not permission to cut corners or skip controls. It is a discipline. The discipline of removing everything that doesn't earn its place by producing a specific, demonstrable outcome. Complexity that cannot justify itself should not exist in your process estate. In practice, this principle changes the design question. Instead of what should this process include, you ask what does this process need to achieve, and then you build only what serves that answer. The discipline is in the removal, not the addition. Adding a step is easy and feels safe. Removing one requires a decision and an owner willing to be accountable for it. This is the counterintuitive truth about this principle. Complexity accumulates passively. Nobody decides to make a process complicated. Steps are added one at a time, each for a good reason, none ever removed. Simplicity requires active, deliberate, ongoing effort. It requires someone to ask regularly, does this step still earn its place, and the authority to remove it when the answer is no. These 3 traps share the same origin. The design optimizes for the designer's concerns rather than the user's reality. Edge cases feel important when you are responsible for preventing them. Feature completeness feels responsible when you are accountable for the configuration. Process length feels thorough when you are writing the procedure. None of those feelings tell you anything about whether the person at the end of the process can use it. The Service Mimir simplification wasn't a compromise. It was a decision made after the team mapped which workflow states and approval layers were actually producing outcomes versus which ones existed because nobody had reviewed them since the original implementation. 38 workflow states removed. None of them had been actively used in the previous 6 months. 8 approval layers removed. All of them had approval rates above 97%. They were checkboxes, not decisions. 3 disciplines, designed for the common case. Test with real users before finalizing. Remove what produces no outcome. These are not radical ideas. They are consistently and systematically ignored in favor of thoroughness, completeness, and the safety of adding rather than the discipline of removing. The Orbis Health incident form had been designed by the problem management team with genuine intent. The data fields were relevant. The triage model was logical. The design was thorough. But nobody had sat with a frontline clinical staff member and asked how many minutes they had available to log an incident during a busy shift. The answer was 2. The form required 7. The gap between 2 and 7 produced the workaround that destroyed the data quality the form was built to protect. The adoption test is the practical measure of this principle. Not does this process contain all the right steps, but do the people who need to use it actually use it? And when they use it, does it produce the outcome it was designed for? Those are two separate questions, and both need a yes before the process can be considered effective. One yes and one no is a process with a design problem. Two no's is a process that shouldn't exist. Ask these three questions about every process you are responsible for. Can it be used without help? What is the minimum it needs? What happens if we remove this step? Three questions that take 20 minutes to work through and consistently reveal that the process contains more than it needs to, and that nobody has had both the authority and the accountability to remove the excess. The post-incident review at CityGrid was one of the more uncomfortable conversations the change management team had experienced. The control was there. It had been written by someone who understood exactly what could go wrong and exactly how to prevent it. It sat on page 47 of a document that 71% of the people responsible for change had never reached. The process hadn't failed. The process had made its own failure inevitable. These three costs are the operating reality of sustained overcomplexity. Workarounds replace process. Data degrades. Compliance becomes performance. And the organization carries the full cost of maintaining the complex process while receiving none of the value it was designed to produce. The process exists. The control doesn't. The shift this principle asks for is a change in the design question. Most process design starts by listing what the process should cover: risks, exceptions, stakeholders, controls, reporting requirements. Keep it simple and practical. Start somewhere different. What is this process for? What outcome does it need to produce? What is the minimum it needs to contain to produce that outcome? Everything beyond that minimum needs to justify its presence or be removed. This is the rule. Every element of every process needs to justify its existence by pointing to a specific outcome it produces. If it can't do that, it shouldn't be there. Not simplified, not reviewed, removed. The discipline of removal is what keeps process estates from accumulating the kind of complexity that produces the CityGrid outcome. A control that existed on page 47 of a document nobody read, protecting against a risk that nobody was prepared to manage. 3 actions, 1 process reviewed with the people who use it, 1 report tested against the decisions it informs, 1 tool configuration audited for active versus avoided features. None of these require a program or a budget. They require a conversation and the willingness to act on what you hear. The simplification follows from the conversation. The conversation is the whole action. The most complex process in your operation right now has people working around it, gaming it or ignoring it. They know exactly which steps are unnecessary and exactly what would make it usable. They have probably told someone before and nothing changed. The action this principle requires is to ask them again, and this time to have the authority to do something about the answer. 3 ways to go further. Name your most complex unowned process in the comments. The responses will map the complexity problem better than any process audit. Check out the Mimir ITIL course for the full picture across all 7 principles. And this week, ask one person 1 question about 1 process. Which 3 steps would you remove? Write down the answer. That list is where you start. Share your experience.